There are several reasons why you might want to make a pre-composition or a pre-comp, or nest a composition inside another one. For example, let's say you've worked on a composition that you're going to use multiple times in upcoming compositions. All you have to do is just nest that composition in those other compositions and save yourself a lot of work. Or let's say you've created an object inside a composition with multiple layers to it, and you want to use that object over and over again inside some composition. And then perhaps you might want to change the characteristics of that object. All you have to do is change it once in the original composition, and it'll ripple through all the places that you used it in the other composition. Or finally, you might have something like a stencil where you've got multiple layers and you've got a stencil applied to it, and you want to add a layer style or an effect that won't work with the stencil. You need to nest that stencil composition in another composition, creating a single layer, and then you can apply layer styles to that or apply effects to that. I'm going to show you all three methods inside this lesson. So to follow along, go to Working Files, open up After Effects Projects, and then open up 1403 Pre-Comp Nesting. The first order of business is to work with this stencil, and it's relatively easy because I set it up for you. Let's just take a look at the stencil though, just to remind you about how stencils work. I've got this background animation that I got as one of the presets on the bottom. I've got one more preset here that has a track matte applied to it, so let me just undo the track matte for the moment so you can see that. We'll put the track matte back on now. Take a look at that track matte. It's just this grayscale image here that I've stretched out, and we're going to animate across that particular background. Let's go back to composition then. Finally, I've got this text on top. I'll turn off the solo there. We can see the text on top. Right now it's stenciled. I'll go back to normal so you can see how it looks originally like that. Now I'll go back to the stencil by doing Control-Command-Z. Now, if you went through the lesson about stencils, you know that if I apply a layer style to this thing, something very bad is going to happen. I right-click on here and go Layer Style, and let's say Drop Shadow, and Goodbye Stencil. Not a good thing. So I do Control-Command-Z and undo that. What we need to do is put this inside another composition. What I've done before is I've taken this stencil comp and simply dragged it down to the new comp icon, and that nests it in a new composition that has the same characteristics, frame size, frame rate, that kind of stuff. And now it's just one layer. Pretty convenient. But I want to show you a different way to do it. I'll do Control-Command-Z to undo that. We'll go back to our original stencil there. I'm going to do something called a pre-comp. I'm going to select all four layers here and convert them into a composition, a separate composition. Now you don't have to select all layers when you create a pre-comp. But in this case, we're going to get all four of them here. I'm going to right-click. There's something down here called Pre-Compose with an ellipsis after it, 3 dots, meaning that when you click on this, it's going to open up a menu. There you go. This is a dialog box saying, what do you want to do? Well, we're going to move all the attributes to the new composition. This other one's grayed out because we have text here, so we won't have that as an option. But nevertheless, this is fine to move all the attributes to the new comp. Let's change the name to a stencil pre-comp like that. Click OK. And what happens is we are still in the original stencil composition, but we've nested a pre-comp inside it, and the pre-comp is this guy we just made. So the pre-comp looks like our original composition, but we've now essentially taken this and nested it inside the original stencil composition. Now we can add a layer style to it by right-clicking, let's say, and go to Layer Styles and choosing Drop Shadow, maybe doing that again and adding a bevel, something like that. I can up these guys and make them a little larger so you can see them. Go over to the bevel and make it a little bit larger too so you can see that. There we go. And that looks pretty good. You can also now add a background to it, whereas you couldn't add a background before because stencils don't let you have backgrounds, but now it's just a single layer. It's no longer a stencil, no longer something cutting through anything. So let's go over and browse the presets. Go to Effects and Presets. Click over here and go Browse Presets. Go to Backgrounds. And we'll just double click on this bright one here to put that in the background. And we need to put it in the background, but there you go. Now we can have a background, whereas the stencil would have cut it. So that's how you take a number of layers and convert it into a pre-comp such that you can now apply these effects. All right, that was relatively easy and painless. Now we're going to go and do some work. Let me show you what we're talking about here. I've got this little button that I created inside Photoshop, and we brought it in, and it came in as 2 layers, and I converted the text layer into editable text here in After Effects to save you that step. And we're going to create 3 buttons using this one as our starting point. And if we want to change things later, we can always come back to this one to make changes. And what we're going to do is we're going to put these buttons on top of this background here. Very large image, which we're going to then put inside a smaller frame. This image is 6600 across, so it's much bigger than HD, and we're going to put this inside an HD frame sooner or later. So you need to go back to the button here and work on that. What we need to do is change the placeholder text to something that we can use in this particular instance. So I'm going to double click on that and change it to something like locations. That's what we're going to do. We're going to mark some locations on that thing. All right, I'm going to click away from there, accept that. And so this is our sort of foundation for all the instances of the buttons that we're going to use. What I want to do now is I want to nest this in a new composition. So I take this button, drag it down to the new comp icon, and I've nested it inside it. So here's the original button composition, now nested inside button 2. I don't want to call it button 2. I'm going to click on this and press enter and change it to something like button main 1. That way we can identify it later. All right, back here, and I want to add some text to it. So I've got my type tool down here, click there, and I'm going to type in something like house. All right, and we'll just get that all centered up nice, like so. There we go. And now I'm going to use that as kind of the basis for the rest of the buttons. So I've got that one. I want to duplicate that button now. So I click on this and go Control or Command D to duplicate it. Control or Command D to duplicate it again. Notice it's called 1, 2, 3 now, which happens automatically when you've got numbers after it like that. Very convenient. Open up number 2 here. It has the house text, but I'm going to change that to forest. I'm going to go to button number 3 and change that text to stream. So now I have 3 buttons that will all have the same characteristics with this guy as the foundation for all 3 of them. All right, I want to put those buttons on that large background, and then we're going to move that background around. And because it's nested, we'll be able to move it around, and the buttons will be in the proper place as we move it around. So I'm going to take this landscape. I'm going to create a comp out of it using the original size of it, and then take those buttons and place them on there. So I take this button 1, which is house, and drag it down here. There you go. Get my selection tool V and move it, let's say, right up there as house. I go get button number 2, which was, I think, forest or woods, right? Put that right there, the forest. And button 3, which is stream, and put that right here. Now we've got these buttons inside this composition. So we nested these buttons, essentially. These are all nested comps here inside this composition. And now I want to animate this composition using the anchor point as a way to do that. So I'm going to create a new composition by clicking on this little button here. I want it to be HD TV, the sort of standard thing I'm doing. I'll call this one the final comp, like that. And we'll have it be, let's say, 10 seconds long. There we go. Now what I want to do is I want to nest this landscape comp inside the final comp. So take the landscape comp and nest it inside there. So you got nest, nest, nest now. And I want to animate this. And now when we want to move around a large image like this, we use the anchor point to do that inside the layer panel. Now if I double click this to open up the layer panel, it won't work. It opens up the original composition, because when you double click on a nested composition, it opens that original composition. So what do you got to do? So you right click on it and you say open layer. That opens it up inside the layer panel. Now I need to see the composition panel. Here it is. I'm going to drag it out and put it over here so I can see it. There you go. Now that really shows the real frame, and here's the full shot. I want to start on the house. I need to view the anchor point path there, and there's the anchor point there. Now as I move it around, if you've done this before, you can see how it shows up over there inside the composition panel. So that's where we'll start, at the house. Need to keyframe the anchor point and the scale. So I'm going to go over here and go A for anchor point and Shift S for scale, and turn on keyframes for those guys. I'm going to go in a little bit here so we can start at this point and hold it for a while. Now we'll go in a little bit and we're going to move over to the forest, for example. So I take this anchor point, move over to the forest. There we go. I think I want to zoom in a bit now. So we'll scale it up like that, perhaps. And now I don't work over here in the composition panel. I work only over here in the layer panel. There we go. I'll let that hold for a while. So I'll go into this next one. I'm going to take these keyframes, Control or Command C to copy them, Control or Command V to paste them there. So it'll go like that. It'll hold for a while to there, and then it'll go on to the next one. And after the next one, we'll be over by the stream. So we'll just move on over to the stream here. Let's kind of pull out on this one now. So we'll zoom back like that. I'll adjust that so it doesn't go off the page like that. Kind of show those houses there to the left. And we'll kind of hold that too by just selecting these guys, Control or Command C, Control or Command V. And let's move back to the house. So now we're going to take our anchor point back to the house, like so perhaps, and maybe zoom out even farther. Show more of our lovely little bucolic location here with all of its buttons showing up. And that now will then animate around. We'll go look at the composition panel over here, more like where we want to see it. Start over here like the house. We'll go there, we'll move to the forest. hold for a while, go over to the stream, hold for a while, and then go back to the house, like so. What we could do at this point is we could animate each of those buttons on as we arrived at that location, and we would do that inside the landscape comp back here. But I'll save you that extra bit of work. What I want to show you is the value of the nested comp. We're going to go back to the original button comp, and I want to change some things. And to see what we're doing as we change it, I'm going to take the layer panel and pull it over here like this, just so you can see what's going on. Go back to the button now. I'm going to change the button's characteristics. Instead of locations, for example, I'm going to change that to places. That'll show up inside the layer comp when I click away from that. You won't be able to really tell that much because it's so small, but I'll try to make it a little bit larger so you can see that. But I'll show you something more dramatic here. I'll click on the button here and open up the layer styles that were imported from Photoshop. And there's a color overlay here that's purple, of course. I'll click on that. Let's change it to yellow. There you go. And that will show up immediately here inside the layer panel and also in the composition. If we go back to that, we look at the final comp there, they all are changed like that. And if I want to add a drop shadow, for example, go back to the button, and I can add a drop shadow here. Just right-click on the layer, go to Layer Styles, add a drop shadow. There isn't one there now. And we'll go to Drop Shadow, click on this. We'll have the distance be something greater than what it is now. And that shows up right there inside the layer panel. We'll take a look at it in the comp. And there the drop shadows are showing up there. So because of all this nesting that we've done, if we go back and change the objects, it ripples through all of these nested comps and comes out looking like that instantly. It's a very effective tool to use this nesting methodology. So there you go. 3 different reasons to use a nested comp or a pre-comp. First, we took a stencil and made it such that we could then apply a layer style or an effect to it. Then we started this whole process with a single asset that we could have used in multiple compositions. And then we took that asset and used it multiple times in this single composition.